Hi everyone, how you doing? I just want to get a show of hands. How many of you actually use Vue? Oh wow, okay. Well, that's a much higher ratio than I expected. So I was at Laracon last year as well, and at that time, it's kind of amazing. Like a year ago, a year from before today, Vue was still relatively just like people just starting to notice it, and it was like still a lot of people were like, what the heck is this new library? Why is there another new front-end library? And today, fast forward 1 year to now, it's been growing at a very amazing pace, I would say. So today, this is kind of going to be still a rather high-level overview of what kind of happened over the year, and like what are the things that's coming up, and also some thoughts of what I think the framework has sort of evolved into, and why and probably why Vue has been growing and we're still around. Going back to way back, so this like the first committed Vue was actually in 2013. So like technically it's already like 4 years old, but it wasn't even named Vue in the beginning. And that was so 0.11. So we started at like the first public release was in February 2014. It was like 0.8, version 0.8, and version 0.11 was in November that year. And in 2015, this is the moment where, like, I'm sure almost all of you kind of were aware of this tweet that came out that kind of just turned everything into rocket mode, and we released 1.0 in October that year. So that was so the release of 1.0 kind of pushed things forward even a bit more, and we've been seeing some pretty insane numbers over the years, and then we did this whole rewrite thing and did release 2.0 in October last year. So I still remember this. So it's almost a year in between, and I still remember the whole process of discussing the new features, and Jeffrey was like really against me removing filters, and we had this back and forth conversation, and we eventually added it back, and it's still in 2.0 today, which looking back, it's actually a good thing, because I like how the voice of the community actually, affects how we decide to shape the framework. And so fast forward to today, we're already at 2.4. We actually released 2.4 like a week ago or so. So we've been adding some new stuff to Vue after the 2.0 release, but I guess some of the numbers would help getting an understanding of where we are at today. So this is the number that I took this morning. You have like 61,000 GitHub stars. We're among like the top 10 all time on all GitHub repository out there, and it's the second most starred JavaScript framework. Stars doesn't actually directly correlate to like the amount of people that's using it, but it's like a relatively inaccurate gauge of interest, I guess. But it's still something to look at. NPM, the Node package manager, on NPM we have 622,000 monthly NPM downloads. So that's also excluding some of the stats from the NPM mirrors from in China. So I would say we're probably at close to 1 million a month. And this one is the most interesting one. I usually, when I talk about, like, when people ask me like how many people are actually using Vue, I usually use this number as a reference, because I think this people who actually install the Chrome DevTool extension and use it on a regular basis are the people who I consider who actually use Vue. So so this number is, we have around like 200,000 people around the world, I guess. So I'm pretty happy with that number. I think last year we were probably at like less than a third of this. So we've like tripled the number over the year. And we're seeing a lot more commercial usage over the globe as well. So we have some, it's interesting because probably because of my Chinese background, Vue has been seeing some exponential growth in China as well. So Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu are the three biggest internet companies in China, and they're all using Vue to some extent in production. In the West, we have like media companies like Vice, NBC, and we have GitLab. How many of you use GitLab? Right? So you are also using Vue in some way as a user, as a consumer. So we also have some pretty successful non-public companies in China, which are valued over $1 billion. We also have a lot of use cases in Japan and Europe as well. So the overall commercial adoption has been growing exceptionally well as well. But I also want to talk a bit about the community, because I believe as open source projects, this is probably the most important thing for the project to grow. We have, so this number is probably a little bit outdated, but we have over 300 contributors on GitHub across the Vue.js organization. So obviously, this includes anyone who has even just submitted like one-line PR to any of the repositories. But I still think it's great to have all these people who are willing to help shape the ecosystem of an open source project. So there are a lot of community projects that's built on top of Vue as well. So some of you might have heard of some of these. So Nuxt.js is a full stack almost. It's Node.js based full stack framework, so probably you won't be using it. But so Quasar is a Ionic-like framework for Vue, which is essentially it allows you to build hybrid mobile apps using Vue and Cordova. Element UI is a suite of interface UI components that are pretty well crafted, and Vuetify, IVue, and Vue Material are all in that category. So these are all projects that have earned at least like 2,000 to 3,000 stars on GitHub as well. So a lot of interesting and thriving community projects that I'm really happy to see. So we were also featured at some of the more like big name conferences earlier this year. So at Microsoft Build earlier this year, there was a section about VS Code, the editor, its improvements, and some of the integration with the latest features in TypeScript. And they actually used Vue as an example to showcase some of the new features, because some of the new features in TS 2.3 and VS Code were actually specifically tailored to make it work better with Vue. At Google I/O, we were featured as one of the case studies for successful PWAs, which is progressive web apps. It's a concept that Google has been pushing very hard lately, and it's mostly about building mobile web apps that look and feel like native apps, and also have some advantages that usually people don't really think mobile web apps are capable of. But they found that Vue actually suited the use case really well. If you're building a PWA, Vue is a very good choice for that. And we also had our own VueConf earlier this year in Poland. Any of you were there? Oh yeah, we got one. So I was totally prepared for like nobody, so that I can, we actually will be releasing a video tomorrow about some of the highlights of the conference, and we really hope we can see some of you there maybe next year. And we're probably going to do a US edition of VueConf as well. So yeah, just so you know. OK, so now back to the framework itself. I want to talk a bit about how Vue has evolved along the way. Before, it was just this really small, really simple library. And now we are obviously having more things in the ecosystem. And we are trying to we went from being just a Vue layer library to something that's more a bigger concept, the progressive framework. why the word progressive in there, right? Like, a lot of people, when talk about front-end stuff, we kind of try to differentiate between the concept of a library versus a framework, and what are the definitions of both, right? Libraries are designed to solve very specific problems. They are narrower in scope, and it's by design, right? They try to solve this single problem domain really, really well, but they don't really want to be concerned about in what context they're using, or they do not try to mandate how you put things together. But the framework is exactly the other way around. The framework tries to help you with the structure. They tell you how you should put things together. And this difference, it may not be so when we talk about choice of tools in the backend world, this may not be that much of a problem to think about, because obviously, if you're building the full thing, you need a framework. So if you're trying to solve a very specific problem, you use a library. But in the front-end world, the line is much more blurry, because the use case of front-end technologies is very, very diverse, right? We have all these kind of projects. Like, let's say if you're building an app with Laravel and Vue, there are many different ways of using the two together, right? You can build a very traditional Laravel app where almost everything is rendered by Blade templates from the server side. And then you just sprinkle Vue on top of it to enhance a few bits. On the other hand, you can also just use Laravel in the back as this backend API, and you have a completely decoupled front end that's a single page application built with Vue, and the two just talk to each other over AJAX HTTP requests. So we have all these different use cases, and sometimes, right? And because of all these types of products we're building, there isn't really one thing that fits all, one size fits all solution to any of these. Sometimes it's better to build this, more server rendered and enhanced on the front end version. Sometimes it's better to build a single page application version, depending on what your product is, right? So there's this problem in the front end that's actually unique to the front end, like how much functionality you're trying to build, how much complexity your app has on the front end, right? So there's this problem of application complexity versus framework complexity. Imagine you are building some extremely simple front-end interactivity bits, sprinkle it over your application, and you're forced to use something like Angular, which you have to use their CLI to install a bunch of NPM dependencies and learn the whole concept of, essentially you're having a parallel Laravel in the front end, so that you're essentially learning two systems at the same time, which would be an overkill for a lot of use cases. Sometimes you just want to enhance what you already have. But on the other hand, sometimes you also have extremely complex front-end requirements that really demands this full-blown framework to help you solve those problems. But more importantly, I believe that scalability is not a one-way street, right? Especially in the front end. It's not about the more the better, the more complex the better, the bigger the better. It's really about taking the right amount of tooling to solve the problem that. So finding the right tool for the job. We always say that. It's not that easy to do in reality. But I think it's important to take that into heart when, as library or framework authors, we really want to, so as author of Vue, I really want to take that to heart and design the framework from the ground up to be able to be flexible to cater to different complexity levels. So that's the whole idea about being progressive. So if we look at all the JavaScript frameworks out there, some of you might probably heard of some of these, like React, Backbone, Angular, and Ember. And there is this spectrum of doing less to more, and this is not about being good or bad. This is really just different design decisions. Some solutions, they were designed to solve a narrower scope of problems. Some were designed to cover more things. And among this spectrum, in the past, we have to sort of pick the different solutions that for different complexity levels of the things that we're building. That creates a problem because there are always technical lock-ins when you pick a framework. So let's say you picked something that's extremely complex, and one day you are tasked to solve a very simple problem, then you kind of have this guilty feeling of just using this super, super heavy-handed framework just to do this very simple thing. And sometimes we feel guilty, and then we're like, maybe we should just use jQuery, and then later on you regret it. And then you have the scenario where you felt like this thing is going to be easy, so I'm just gonna use the easy stuff, right? And then in the end, the product team just added more features and features and features, and you realize, oh, it's getting out of control. I should have, maybe picked something more more complex from the get-go. So we run into all that kind of problems, but we have these simpler solutions that have these ecosystems of supporting libraries to help them to scale up to handle these more complex scenarios. So now we have sort of like the flexibility of being able to adapt across the spectrum of complexity. We can, like when we want to solve simple problems, we use the thinner, the leaner version. We use just the core library, right? When we want to solve more complex problems, we take the whole stack. So React and Vue are probably the more obvious examples of this, where both offer this core library, which is just the Vue layer, and we also have supporting libraries to help you deal with more complex scenarios. But there is also a difference between these two. The cost of flexibility leads to something called JavaScript fatigue. How many have heard of this term? OK, so not many of you. You guys are lucky. So as full-time JavaScript developers, there are so many new things that are just constantly coming out, like almost every single week. And people were just getting tired of keeping up, especially in the React community, because it's an extremely vibrant community, but it's also a lot of churn, right? Like you see, how many of you know about CSS in JS? Not many, but if you've been keeping track of it, there are probably like 30 to 40 competing solutions out there at this very moment. And there are still new ones coming out. And everyone claims to have found the new holy grail of solving every problem you'll ever have. But then we realize it's all trade-offs, and it's still not settled down. And we have this process of JavaScript fatigue, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? It's good that there are new ideas coming out of all of these experimentations, but it also creates this cost of keeping up. And there's no central authority to tell you like which one of these would probably fit 90% of your use cases, and just go with it. So Vue want to cover that to some extent, right? We want to make something that's progressive, a framework that's progressive, so that when you want to scale up from the very minimum, you know where to go. We give you the pieces. We have the router. We have the state management tools. We have single file components and the Webpack build tools and all that. You don't have to just to ask the question of what should I pick, because there is this default official solution. But if you know what you're doing and you don't like some piece of it, you're free to swap it out. For example, so this whole thing is made up of these layers. Many of you might probably have seen this graph before, because I used the same image in previous talks. A framework can be layered, made into layers of different problem domains. And that's exactly how Vue is designed. And the advantage of this is the flexibility in architecture leads to flexibility in integration. So that plays a very important role. For example, when we are trying to use Vue and Laravel together, Mix provides this higher level abstraction. Mix doesn't use the default Vue CLI stuff that we would provide, because it would actually create some extra complexity when we're trying to put a Vue CLI project and a Laravel project together. So Mix kind of tried to abstract away from you by using bits from the Vue tool chain, and take that and wrap it on top of it, essentially replacing the default build setup of what Vue provides out of the box, and then giving you this more streamlined experience as Laravel developers. So I think that's a good example of how flexibility in architecture design leads to this sort of better integration and better, most importantly, better developer experiences for users of frameworks like Laravel. Okay, so now we're going to go into some of the features or things that we've been adding since the arrival of 2.0. So I think when I was at Laracon last year, I was still working on 2.0. It wasn't even released yet. So after 2.0, the biggest addition is that we rewrote the whole rendering layer using a virtual DOM implementation. So virtual DOM is like, we use it as a lower level technical concept. But the biggest benefits of this rewrite is now we are able to target things that's more than just the browser. So this probably has less direct connection with Laravel, but it's something about Vue as a front-end framework expanding the same development experience, the same the way you think and write about UI. How do we make this more apply to more scenarios, not just web applications? So first, we have server-side rendering. So when we think about Vue stuff, one of the earlier advantage of Vue regarding to server-side frameworks is we can write our templates directly in the DOM. So somewhat you already have a pre-filled DOM structure that's in the page. So that kind of helps with SEO a little bit. But still, you don't want to show the those mustaches before compiled mustaches to the user. So we use vcloak to hide it. But then this creates a problem of where when your page renders, you have to wait until the JavaScript bundle is downloaded, and then the JavaScript gets parsed, evaluated, Vue kicks in, start doing things, and then finally setting up the HTML, inserted into the DOM, replacing the templates that you wrote in the DOM. Right? So that process takes time. Essentially, a user has to wait wait for the whole process of making the request, getting the JavaScript, doing everything before they can actually see any content. Right? They will see a blank screen, or maybe parts of your page are just not interactive or not showing anything until the whole process is finished. So, but the time to content can result in better conversions in a lot of cases, especially if you're building products that are conversion sensitive. How fast the user can open your page is really important in this case. So server-side rendering solves the problem by doing more. Like even for your front-end code, even if your components, your page is written purely with Vue.js, dynamically rendered with Vue, you can still render that on the server so that when the user sends a request to your server and your response goes back, it already contains the fully rendered HTML. So this helps not only with time to content, it also helps with SEO and all that stuff. So this is what server-side rendering helps with. But the limitation right now is the whole thing is implemented in Node.js. So it requires a JavaScript runtime because we're executing the same logic. The same code that you write on your front end for Vue components, the same JavaScript has to be executed on the server to perform the render. So that means we need a JavaScript runtime on the server. Currently, that's tightly coupled to Node.js. There have been requests on making this decoupled from Node.js. Right? So that's something we are actually looking at. We want to provide an alternative build of the server render of Vue.js that's decoupled from Node.js that only requires a standard V8 JavaScript engine runtime, which would make it runnable inside PHP V8.js, the integration. So imagine if that happens, you can actually write parts of your Laravel application and then insert. So you have a Vue component, you can pre-render it in your PHP process, insert it into your Blade templates, and now on the client side, you would have this pre-rendered Vue application that's ready to go. So that's something we hope that we can achieve in the future, and I'm pretty optimistic about it because it's totally technically feasible. We also have native rendering. How many of you have heard of weeks? Okay, so this is, how many of you have heard of native script or React Native? Okay, so the weeks is essentially React Native, but it's more for Vue. It's not like tightly coupled with Vue, but the default runtime, the default API they provide is essentially Vue-based. It's a project that's built by Alibaba, the biggest e-commerce company in China, and they donated this project to Apache Foundation. So this is now technically part of Apache. It's still in incubation, but it's technically an Apache project now. And what they built is the same native rendering engines for iOS, for Android. They also have an adapter for web. And then they have this runtime, which is essentially a slightly alternated version of Vue. So if you look at it, you look at Vue source code, you see there's a platform directory. Within that, we have web and Weeks. So we have two builds. We have one build for web and one build for Weeks. So it's using the exact same runtime code of Vue, which allows you to author single-file Vue components that render into native components on iOS and Android to get the performance of native apps. This is the same Hacker News demo that's rendered with Weeks, and you can see that it's actually native. Okay, so then there are, so if you've been keeping up to date with the releases of 2.1 to 2.4, you probably know, but outside of the core library, we also have the whole ecosystem around it. And we are actually shifting more focuses to the ecosystem now that we feel pretty happy about where the core library is. So some of the things we've been really excited to see. So Vater, this is a IDE plugin. So how many of you use VS Code by any chance? Not many. WebStorm? PHP Storm? OK. So JetBrains IDEs also have some basic Vue support, I believe. But Vater kind of is a VS Code plugin that kind of pushes the thing to a new boundary. It has not only auto-completion, but like Amid auto-completion. It can integrate with your linters. It can auto-format your code. It can even perform type checking if you use TypeScript. It essentially gives you anything you can think of for an IDE. And what's great about this is the author of Vater has managed to extract the core logic of analyzing. So most importantly, this is for single-file Vue components. Like even inside single-file Vue components, you can get this full IDE-like experience. And the author of Vater has managed to extract this logic of analyzing, parsing, and providing all these information about Vue components into an editor-agnostic package called Vue Language Server. So this is built on top of this thing called Language Server Protocol. That's a protocol that's proposed by Microsoft and now implemented in a lot of editors. They also, probably through some adapters, but a lot of mainstream editors have supported this. And I'm pretty sure JetBrains IDEs will support this as well. So with this protocol, this Vue Language Server can essentially power any IDE or editor that you are using to provide the same level of developer experience when you are working with Vue. So inside a Vue component, you would get all these benefits that we mentioned just now. Once this gets more matured. And we also have this new official ESLint plugin. How many of you use ESLint? Okay. So ESLint is this front-end utility, front-end tool that helps you to link your code, to find syntax errors before you actually run it. So some of the typical things, like some of it help you find stylistic issues. But I think the more valuable part is it can help you catch these like really stupid syntax errors in your templates, right? So when we're authoring Vue templates, sometimes we would run into situations where like you type something wrong there, but it silently fails and you don't really know why it just isn't working. So ESLint plugin Vue really tries to minimize that sort of scenarios by providing template syntax level linting. It's not just linting your JavaScript. It links your whole single-file Vue components. It parses your templates. It walks through the AST, to figure out if you have made potential syntax mistakes in your templates. So this is still kind of a work in progress. Well, the infrastructure is there. We are just adding more rules and discussing what should and what should not be in there. But this is something that's going on. If you're into linking everything statically, then you should probably try it. We're also working on an official unit testing utility for Vue components. So previously, there are a bunch of community solutions for testing Vue components. So front-end testing is probably, how many of you test your front-end code? Not many, right? It seems like a hard thing to do. But we hope we can make it easier for you. So we're working on this official unit testing utility and want to also working on an official front-end test guide to help you, to provide you with this guide of like what typically should you test for front-end stuff. How do you test the Vue component? And how do you do end-to-end integration testing with Vue? So this is also pretty much a work in progress, but the testing utility is almost ready. And we are going to start working on the guide on top of that, so which would help if you want to do more front-end testing to make your front-end more robust. And we also have something that's called better TypeScript support if you like type hints. I know not everyone wants to write statically typed code, but the team at Microsoft has actually been really enthusiastic about making TypeScript work better with Vue. So we've had this standing PR we're planning to merge it soon, and will provide a very good experience for authoring Vue with TypeScript. So currently it already works. A lot of Vue users actually use TypeScript with Vue, but you have to get good type inference. You actually have to use an alternative JavaScript class-based syntax to write Vue components, so that TypeScript can figure out what this should mean in the Vue component. But with this new PR, improved type definitions and the new features in TypeScript 2.3 and 2.4, even just using the default object-based Vue API, you can also get very great type inference for almost everything. So if you're into types, then this is something you should probably look forward to. OK. So how am I doing on time? Just let me check real quick. Okay. I think I went pretty fast. But yeah, that's actually all I have today. So the long-term goal of Vue.js as the library or a framework is really not about what technical features we can crank out. The goal is really focused around happier and more productive developers. Everything we want to work on, want to make sure that it helps you find your life easier, find your job easier to do. That's the most important thing, and I believe that's some value that's shared between Laravel and Vue, and which is why the two work so well together. So yeah, so I'm really happy to see that Vue is being adopted in the Laravel community, and sincerely thank you for all of the support, and thank you.